Alrighty, Sam Foot back, and yeah, I was streaming a few hours ago and had some chores to do. We're just continuing a new stream on the same day. In some street clothes out of my shop jammies. You often see me wear ragged up, trashed white Hanes t-shirts. I wear those because one, they're cheap, they're comfortable, and I don't mind getting paint all over them. It's kind of my uniform, short shorts and Hanes Classic tees. Anyway, I've actually been messing around with this a little bit in the last couple hours, trying to get my brain back in the mood, and yeah, excited to get going again. So I'll probably stream for, I don't know, a little while, till we burn out. I was saying earlier, I started talking before I had to split about finishing work, you know. See, I tend to, I think it's not uncommon, you know, but as a creative person, just, actually I'm going to elongate this breast. It should be more egg-shaped. I just realized that looking at it when I kind of messed that up. In fact, this should go up higher. Maybe turn that into some cast shadow. So about finishing work, that I tend to get to a certain point with a lot of paintings. Usually the point I get to is whatever gets the inspiration out. So my point is I'll start a project and work on it until I'm satisfied that I got the basic idea down, be it aesthetically or philosophically, whatever that idea was for whatever individual piece I'm working on. And then I'm going to throw some stuff in here that won't be there in the end. It's going to be implied at the end, but the reason I'm doing it is to, even though my anatomy is nowhere obviously even close to realistic, I still try to imply all the right muscle forms, because I actually am okay at doing anatomy from my head. I've spent years doing it. I do kind of a caricature of it, you know, of reality. So in a sense, you can call it surreal or caricature, whatever makes you happy, but it's just the way I work. Maybe give him kind of a lump to his nose there. That's kind of cool. Gives him a little bit more character. And that I like to do shows, a lot of shows, to finish projects I'd started previously. Once I got that initial inspiration out of my head, I kind of feel like it's like putting something down in your journal. You got it out of your head. It was an important enough thought to have recorded in the first place. So it's kind of like a journal entry in a sense, just getting that initial couple layers down on a painting, or even just that first layer down on a painting. And then maybe even just coming back to it months later. And by having 40 or 50 or 30 or however many paintings I generally have going at once, not all of them ever always get finished, but a huge proportion of them do. It's actually surprising how many of them actually do get finished. But how I work it is that I will finish pieces appropriate to the right venue that I'm working in. So if I'm doing a coffee shop show, I do nudes sometimes if they're tame, and it depends on the coffee shop and the owner. I'm lucky to have shown mostly in places where I've gotten to know the people, so they give me a certain amount of leniency. I get away with a lot more doing public shows than I probably should, you know, with some of the subject matter that I show, I mean, because I've done coffee shop shows with plenty of nudes, and on the contrasting side, a lot of really dark work. Almost Giger, Beksinski, not in that style, just trying to give you an idea, if you know who those artists are, in terms of what I mean by dark, because a lot of my earlier work is mostly darker work. It was just a reflection of my angst, I think, and still is a reflection of my angst, not my youth. My youth is long gone, but by setting a goal, by having a show, it forces you to take everything out of the closet, appraise it, see what's appropriate for the venue you have planned. I usually put a date out about 2 months. I don't want the date out too far. If it's too far out, then I'll get lazy and I'll just blow the time anyway, you know? I'll be like, oh, it's 6 months away. I don't have to stress about it. So, but if I put it out 2 months, then yeah, it's instant. It's an obligation that I've set at that point. So I have to honor my obligation, and I always like to show up and look good, you know? I mean, what's the point of doing a show if you're not gonna have a good show? And however you define a good show is up to you, but for me, a good show is feeling confident and proud of what I'm putting out there, even if nothing ever sells. A little water. And if I'm doing a bar show, maybe I can have more nudes in it. Or I have a whole series I've done for years. And it's an ongoing thing. I'll do in my entire life, however much longer that'll be, of bar art. I enjoy it. A lot of artists, especially when you're younger, they'll reject the idea of doing what some artists might consider as kitsch art, meaning meant to appeal to the common person and meant to sell. Well, what the hell's wrong with that? I'm not saying that you can't do edgy. I'm just saying that not every single thing you have to do necessarily always has to rub people the wrong way, you know? Now, the world's a big enough place where there's an audience for everybody, but I tend to create all kinds of genre of work. And not because I'm trying to create mass appeal. It's because I have a lot of interest in different things. And painting the same shit all the fucking time gets boring. And if you're an artist and you need permission from your audience to do what you want, then you have the wrong audience. You start off the wrong place in the first place. I often speak of certain artists, but Beksiński, Polish painter, some of you may be aware, his name is spelled Bekskisinski. Yeah, Polish names. I had to think about that one. Anyway, if you want to look him up. But the reason I bring him up is to that point because even though a Beksiński painting, well, he didn't actually start painting until he was like 40 years old. He was actually a writer and photographer up until that point. And then he started his painting career in his early 60s and 70s works. His work during the 60s and early 70s, I mean, garnered an immediate reaction, and he got a certain audience for it. And then later, when he wanted to start doing other stuff because he felt like doing something else, that audience that he had built up recoiled. They really didn't like his work, and they're extremely critical of what he was doing, which I personally I find funny because, at least in reflection, I didn't find his work until the early aughts, but when I first discovered his work, I actually like his later work more. It's much looser. When he was younger, in his early mid-40s, his work was a lot tighter. And I think that that's a common pattern with a lot of artists. You know, it's an old saying that artists will tend to loosen up as they get older. And I think that's because you just don't give a fuck anymore. You don't care. You want to do what you want to do. You want to have fun. You don't want to necessarily grit your teeth every time you're doing a brush stroke, trying to be perfect all the time or render everything perfectly or appease a certain audience with the subject matter of your work. You just want to be a painter and paint whatever in the hell makes you happy, or whatever you have to paint to make yourself happy from a psychological perspective. And so my point is that artist work changes, you know, it can, and mine has, and it continues to do so, but I still work in all the genres of art that I started at in terms of like subject matter, not in terms of I lost my train of thought. Like, I don't mean to say style, but my point is just do whatever the hell you want to do. But I like to put different genres of work in different venues, and that gives me the opportunity to have a lot of paintings going at once, a lot of different kinds of work, and work that I enjoy doing, because I really truly love doing. So a lot of my work is pretty caricature-y, regardless of if it's realistic, abstract, surreal, whatever genre I'm working at the time. You can almost always tell it's a Sam Foote painting, but they might look radically different. I've had collectors say the same, like where they'll be looking at my work and try and milk my brain for how in the hell I paint so radically different from one painting to another. And it's only because of boredom. You know, right now I'm painting a beautiful nude, and lost my music there. And I love it, and there isn't a lot to think about in this. That's why I love it. It's a celebration of life and light and beauty. Whereas some of my darker work is purely introspective. And it's very aesthetic. Yes, my dark work is equally strong aesthetically, just with a different aesthetic. I still warp and twist everything. But as I believe I mentioned earlier, my darker work tends to be a little bit more monotone most of the time. Not always. Sometimes it's just every bit as bright as this. But as for finishing paintings, if I can just get the idea down and then revisit it when I find the show that's appropriate to that piece, that's when I really focus and hunker down on the last 20% of actually finishing the piece. Because that 20, 30, 40% or whatever is left on that piece to actually do is actually often the most time-consuming aspect of that painting. I find the first stages of a painting the most fun, because you can be looser, and as you tend to go and you start to refine your image, you tend to slow down a little bit. Slower strokes, more choosy, a little less sketchy. You'll see often that I'm very sketchy. But when I get down to the nitty gritty and I'm coming to the end and I'm really refining things, I'll move very slow and deliberately and analytically. And I'll take a lot of small little sessions of time on a session as I'm finishing up a painting. I'll usually do shorter, smaller sessions. And the reason is so that I can have some time to reflect on what I'm doing. You know, put it against the wall, turn around, walk away for a day, come back, look at it, and then be shocked at how horrible it is, or how beautiful it is, or be pleasantly surprised. It can go either way. Usually does go either way. Usually it's 50-50. A little bit happy, a little bit bummed out. But right now, what I'm working on here is just trying to build contrast. My color scheme's pretty set in terms of how this is actually going to radiate, how it's going to affect the viewer. I have most of my color themes down. Now I'm just refining them and building on them. Maybe I've got a little too purple with that. That's okay. And going in here and working on these lights and darks, because that's all you're doing most of the time, is working on light and dark. Now, I initially kind of drew in a bunch of, this is a sketchy detail. It's thrown in pretty quick. Went in some darker color, came in with some lighter color over it. But now I'm realizing that in a lot of areas I think it's not dark enough. Or maybe it's just not light enough in the light areas. It depends on how you look at it. But the darkest part of this painting right now is this cast shadow underneath her butt and her back and against this tree. Now I've been lightening it up as we've been working here, and this in the last session, and more gradiating this dark a little bit more as it comes forward. Ooh. Now that looks black, but it's not. It's really dark green. It's pretty hard to tell color on a camera, unless it's really close up. And as I work, I may pull it off the tripod there and walk right up and give you guys some close-ups so you can see what I'm actually doing. That was horrible. That was totally the wrong thing there. That's okay. I'm not going to panic about it. He can sit there for a minute. Yeah. So it's a little bit of both, I think. I think I need to come in here and darken it and lighten it at the same time. It's usually that way. And I don't want a lot of render detail in my real dark areas. I'm just going to grab a bigger brush and grab this big flat maybe and start going to town on darkening some of these areas. I might even want to, I have a little bit of green here and I darken, ooh, is this brush not washed? Whoops. Put a little magenta in this green to kind of kill it a little. It'll suck some of the saturation out of it. And then I'm just going to come through here, and I don't want to wipe out all my saturation in here. I'm actually just trying to hit in between it and darken some areas, because those are going to be receding. I don't want to kill it. I don't want it to look dead. I don't want to just desaturate it, throw a bunch of gray in here, you know, or... I do like to say a lot that I think it's important to throw a little dirt in the sauce. That's how your colors shine. Your colors will shine if they have something to contrast against. But I love contrast. Who doesn't like contrast? In any scope. But yeah, these colors here are a little dead. I'm taking some phthalo, I'm mixing it with a little bit of magenta, a touch of yellow, making a super dark green. A little bit more magenta. Well, it's pretty saturated. I'm gonna wipe out that darkest part of the blue there. It's unfortunate. But it has to be done. Sometimes you have to wreck what you love to make it better. Like, I like these colors in here, but they're not flowing right, so I may reestablish it later, but for now I'm gonna come in here and, because it'll just be a lot easier to straighten this all out. I've been actually avoiding this foreground area because it's such a mess right now that I didn't even know where to start. Sometimes the best way to fix something is to get brave and just wipe out areas and then work back into them. And I really feel that it's worth coming in here and just reestablishing all my darks again before I go back into this light. It's actually something I've been wanting to do for forever. I just keep putting it off, but it's a fun painting. It started as an umber underpainting in acrylic, actually, and it was actually decently detailed for one of my acrylic underpaintings. I mean, it could have stood on its own if I wanted it to, but I I started it with the intent of actually throwing oil over it, so that's where we're at. And acrylic's fun, but I tend to stick to oil for the most part. It's just my comfort zone, and I'm not afraid of getting out of my comfort zone. In fact, I love getting out of my comfort zone. It's the only way you can learn. For example, several years ago, I got back into messing around with watercolor. I think every kid probably plays around with watercolor at some point in their life, even if it's the cheap little 62-cent pads that you get at like the dollar store, whatever you happen to have grown up with. For me, it was elementary and cheap ass freaking watercolor paint, but I've always been intimidated by watercolor. It's just a medium where it seemed like it was kind of like airbrushing, and I used to airbrush a lot, where you can't afford to fuck up too much. You have to kind of know where you're going. So I tend to use my watercolor skills for doing studies, you know, and my studies will get very fanciful. They'll look very fancy-like as well, but I usually do them on location. I'll go down the park or whatever and paint some mountains, some trees, maybe the people playing in the park with their dogs. It's just good practice, and that was traditionally what watercolor was used for. William Turner used to use watercolor extensively. In fact, I always kind of saw him as, you know, growing up, I always loved his oil paintings, so I always blushed over his oil work. But in fact, you know, 98% of his work was all watercolor and drawings in various media. And while I don't paint anything like Turner's style, I take a lot from Turner. I take a lot of technique from Turner. I've studied Turner extensively. He's one of my favorite artists of all time, and one of hundreds of my favorite artists of all time. But he's definitely at the top of the list. And Beksinski, another one of my favorite painters, who came much later than Turner. I think Beksinski lived all the way up until the early aughts. I think 2001, 2002 he died. He was murdered, actually, by the son of a couple who were his housekeepers. It's a tragic story, actually. But as screwed up as this might sound, it's kind of thing that associated with Beksinski, and if in his work, then you would almost say it was an appropriate way for him to go out, and sounds up. His work, it's very very dark, very nightmare-esque. And a lot of people don't get his work, but he was a child in Poland growing up in the middle of World War II. And he was surrounded by nothing but ugliness. And it really shows in his work. But I find his work very beautiful. You know, I don't see it as negative. I find his work very calming, actually. It mirrors my own darkness. As I've said, I've done a fair amount and always will do a lot of dark work, but I think I like this most of the time more. It's just more fun. And I really have my heart in this as much as anything I do. If you don't have your heart in it, then you're probably not going to do a very good job at it. And you'll find that people who excel at anything that they do tend to study it a lot. Like I constantly study. I don't always focus on the things that I should study and work on them as well as I can. I could spend a week drying hands and that would make me a lot better at drying hands. I'm okay at drying hands. I'm not terrible at it, but if I just broke down and spent a week drying them, and this applies to anybody, of course you could be a lot better at it. And I can always think of things like that where I have certain deficiencies in my skill set and I want to work on them. But for me, the biggest leaps in art are observational, philosophical leaps. For example, if I happen to not end up drawing much over a several month period, which I won't sometimes if I'm really into oil painting a lot, because I generally don't. I did on this one, funny enough. I drew out the girl. Everything else I just kind of figured out with the brush, drew it in with the brush, but I tend not to draw or pre-plan what I'm doing. I can see it in my head to some degree, and then I kind of work out the equation on the canvas. But I've got my YouTube subscriptions maxed on following artists and science channels for the most part. Some car stuff, some game stuff, but mostly it's like 95% art and artists, fellow artists, and other creative ventures, sculptors, things of that nature. And I watch hours of that a day. This great compendium of human knowledge that we have at our fingertips all the time. It's fun to get brave and try and be a small, tiny, itty-bitty part of that, you know? Just add your own craziness to the mix, to the great soup of humanity. So yeah, it's pretty radical going in, and it looks devastating. This is like when you see Bob Ross going in and painting a huge tree across everything they just spent 20 minutes throwing detail into, and you want to scream, no! And then he does it, and you're like, oh, wow, that actually looks okay. That's this moment. And you just have to have faith that you'll be able to carry it through and have that aha and make what seems like going backwards make sense, because this isn't going back. It is going backwards, but it's going backwards with purpose to save me a huge amount of time, because you can't see it, but I have thousands and thousands of strokes in here that are just really, really distracting, because at the time I really didn't know where I was going to go. And now I'm trying to find resolution. I'm trying to find where I'm going. And so right now, and I'm not trying to wipe it all out, you'll see I'm avoiding certain areas and certain saturations. Anything that I really, really like, I'm just kind of working around a little bit. No big deal. Then I'm going to come back and pull my light back out. Like I like this little grass in here, but it's not right. I need to fix the distance on this. But first, before I can do that, I need to come in here and get all my darks in. And this is a glaze. I'm not completely wiping it out. You could actually see through this into everything I'm covering, which just makes everything that I'm covering less of a distraction and equalizes it a little bit. And then and that'll just be texture for when I come back and pull out more grass back into it. I'm saving myself hours of frustration of going in here with a small brush and trying to fix this the hard way. Fuck it, grab a big brush. Don't waste your time. And don't be afraid, because even though you might hate this at first, it's okay. It will get better in the end. One hopes. We all hope. Now, a lot of artists will argue you should paint in all your darks and then pull out the lights with your paint, because it's easy with oil paint to go dark and then pull your lights back out. But I actually kind of half-ass way do that. I actually really think it's much wiser to Turner, for example. I brought up Turner earlier. He's a perfect example of this. He was, as I said, primarily a watercolorist, even though he's famous for his oil paintings as much as his watercolor. But his approach to oil was to start, as far as anybody can tell, by painting with oil like it was watercolor. So he painted very, very, very thinly and did a lot of washes. So washes are basically just thinner and paint in a big old brush or whatever size brush you want to use, and doing your block in with washes so that the ground, whatever you chose as your starting point, your mass tone, be it white, or if it was a white canvas, or if you toned your canvas, whatever you started with will show up. So, and I'll get better at it, but and even though I talk to myself constantly when I paint, it's a little hard to reason my thought processes out sometimes when I'm trying to communicate what I'm thinking and doing at the same time. It's like patting your head and rubbing your belly and chewing gum all at the same time, which isn't that hard for me. But yeah, it's all right. Now, like I said, there is that fear when you start doing this that you're overdoing it, or that is my fear right now, to be completely honest. But you have to have faith in your process. Which isn't really your process. It's a process that's been used for generations. You're borrowing it. And then when we're done using it, we die, we pass it on to the next generation. Hopefully in your work, hopefully work that's worth remembering, noticing. That's what we all hope, right? Being a good communicator. Check my phone, make sure it's still going. Yeah, we're 34 minutes in, which feels like 3 minutes in art time. Yeah. And let your bristles work for you too. I've really resisted that. I even still do all the time. I resist it, letting the brush work for me. Instead, I'm trying to muscle the brush into creating whatever stroke I want. Usually that was my old approach. Now I'm just trusting the brush. Just grab the right brush for the job. You know, it's like when an artist will go in and tap in foliage on a tree. Well, I always found that, I used to find that really lazy, but honestly, if you do it well, it ends up actually looking more natural than if you go out and try and pick out every leaf, because when you're choosing to pick out every leaf, it ends up looking artificial because you chose to put every leaf there. Whereas, you know, if you take a brush, it's almost fractal. You almost have a random pattern already built for you, so take advantage of it. Yeah, just trying to... Grass can be really complicated, and so I kind of I think I sometimes overwork it, honestly. I never really want to make my grass look realistic. In fact, my grass kind of always looks like a Skittle. Like you could pull a blade of grass out and taste the rainbow. But I try and catch the feeling, the flow of foliage. That's what I care about. Like if a tree's blowing in the wind, or how all this grass might move like a wave on the surface of a lake when the wind hits it, because that's what grass looks like under the right conditions. So I try and capture the flow and movement of something to describe it. Grass doesn't necessarily always need to be green. I have a lot of orange, a lot of blue, a lot of Magneta. Still comes off as grass, I hope. Not done with it. There'll be typical of me on this channel all the time of like starting a conversation and forgetting to finish it, or picking up a conversation that I started in a video before or even hours before, and then carrying on that conversation later, like the sentence never ended. Because I get constantly distracted by all the little squirrels in my universe here. And even though I'm doing a glaze, I'm really trying to pay attention to following the flow of what's going on in here. Like you might see me just glazing in here, but I'm not going across the grass, I'm going with it. Because all these striations of the glaze, even though they're darkening what's there, they still visible. You still see the granularity of every stroke. Because sometimes a glaze can get kind of granular looking. So I find it important to follow the flow. As Chevy Chase would say, be the ball, be the ball. No, 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 no. All right, so I'm just trying to resolve where this tail is going. I'm darkening everything around it just so I can see it, and then I've never really been happy with how I had my composition in that area. We'll figure it out. It's not horrible. We'll work on it. The real fun part will be coming back and pulling all the light back out. But this is just a necessary evil. It was driving me nuts. It's actually been driving me nuts for like I said, for months, like for a long time. That's why I haven't worked on this actually. I put it away. Sometimes, you know, it's easy to scare yourself with your own projects. Get yourself underwater, you know. Bit off more than you can chew at the time. It's good, take a break. do something else, come back to it when you feel more confident. I can't wait to starting paintings for you guys. I already did, sort of. I have an edited video that'll probably take me a couple months. I have to buy the software. I've been messing around with it, the free version, but it puts a huge watermark in the middle when you're done editing your video, so I have to buy it. But that'll be a little ways off. But yeah, this guy. That was just one 4-hour session, really quick. Just a quick, this guy's just a quick wash. It's just all thinner, and this is what I was talking about with Turner. This is how I painted this so far. It's just all very, very little amount of oil paint was used. Just a touch. With huge amounts of thinner. It's actually very dry and very matte looking, because when you work with thinner, it's acidic and it breaks down those oils. I actually kind of like working that way. Drier. Now, this painting isn't that way. It's very oily. A lot of this I did in wet on wet sessions, whereas I tend now more to work dry brush. Run out of paint. Yeah. So I'm painting where I'm painting right now. You can't even see it, but I don't even know if the camera can see the part of the canvas I'm working on. Actually, I should look. Aim it down for you a little bit. Anywho, yeah, I'm working at the base of this, and you can still see I didn't completely cover it in oil paint yet. I still have some acrylic showing through. That's this warmer color I was working into, if you can even see that from prior session. Or earlier in this session, I mean, where I'm covering up the umber underpainting that was done in acrylic still. It hasn't had oil put over it yet, so this is its version wash of oil. Yeah, this looks, I mean, there's a lot of interest in this, but it's kind of oppressively dark, and it will not be this way in the end. I'm not entirely sure. I doubt that I'll start pulling light out in this area in this session, because I actually want this glaze to dry. That way, if I fuck up, which is inevitable, I can always just wipe out areas and not disturb my underpainting. Oh yeah, and the green. That's a bit more saturated, but it's a good saturated, deep saturated, dark, cool green. For the longest time, I didn't work in color. I wasn't one of those kids. I had my crayons and stuff, and I, would mess around with them, but I don't know what it is with me. I guess I just felt I needed to get a feel instinctively for form when I was younger, but I honestly didn't start engaging in color in my work very much until, not even when I was airbrushing. When I was airbrushing, I was doing mostly kind of Giger-esque, very monotone, very limited palette work. And I think that, I guess I just felt repressed and held back for years, because now I just explode in color now. Now it's like my favorite thing in the universe. It almost looks like I pour the shit out of the tube directly onto the canvas sometimes, but I assure you, there's a lot of hard work in making it look that way, when that is certainly not the case. There's a huge amount of subtlety and variation in all of this. And while I will actually, I'm not above using paint directly out of the tube, not at all. I do it all the time, but I reserve that for the areas that I really, really want to smack you in the head with, smack you right in the eyeballs with. It's part about being an effective communicator, is knowing how to talk to people through your paint. And there's a lot of ways of doing that.
in many ways as their artists, but also beyond that obvious statement, just within yourself. From so many angles. Philosophically, color theory was compositionally, yada yada yada. You can keep going forever. It's a fun thing being a painter. It's kind of like being an astrophysicist, I think, in a sense. There's no absolutes. It's just constant theorizing about something that is beyond your scope. I'm not saying we don't have a decent basic working of the, again, basic fundamentals of the universe. That's not my point. I just mean that even if you think you have all the answers, you probably don't. You can only answer the questions for yourself. Even if somebody gives you an answer, the only answer you're usually going to accept is the one you want to hear. That's the way it is with people. It's a big part of the disparity in this planet. Disparity in belief systems and how people get along with each other. It's because one person's reality isn't the other person's. All right. It's starting to be something. I'm really happy I'm doing this. Put the big boy pants on and just getting brave. And that's fun. Don't be afraid of yourself. Maybe you should be afraid of yourself. I'm afraid of myself. That's smart. But I'm just saying, don't be afraid of making mistakes. As I said in the last video, this is merely a record of a series of corrections, because every stroke you're watching me put down right now is probably going to get replaced. It's a real high likelihood. Because, at least in this, I probably, as I alluded to in another video, I probably have a couple dozen sessions on this. Like in oil, not even counting the acrylic. The acrylic I actually had probably over a dozen sessions on. So I don't really consider it overworked. Overworking is where you basically over-render. That's how I feel about overworking, where you're over-rendering when you're, and I do it all the time. I was doing it on the last painting. The first video you'll see on my YouTube page is that painting. I have a lot more videos to come on that. It's almost done. Seeing over here, facing the wall, I did my last major session on it this week. Last week, whatever it was. And yeah, it's a painting many months in the making and remaking since I did a complete paint over on it. So, but I'm excited to finish that one for you guys on camera, because I'm going to sign it on camera, and that'll be coming in the next couple days. Super excited, and that one has a client for it. We'll see if they still want to pay for the sucker. It's been a while since I talked to them, and there's been a lot of drama in the world since then, so we'll see. I'm a little nervous about it. I could use the boost though. So it's good to make sale. It's nothing to brag about, I suppose. I just... I don't have a lot of problem selling paintings when I put it out there. I mean, I do. Everybody does. It's not like my shit's just flying off the fucking shelf into people's homes. But, I mean, let's say I do an average show. Coffee shop show, bar show or something. There'll be plenty of shows where I don't sell a damn thing, but there's other shows where my average is like 5-7 pieces out of 20 or more that I'll hang in a show, and
I actually don't think that's too bad. And when you add that up to, I don't know how many shows I've done in my life, but a lot, it stacks. After about 25 years of doing this professionally and doing shows professionally, it adds up. But that's the goal. That's the goal of this channel. Not only just educating you, but getting more eyes, getting more eyes on what you do. Art does no one any good hiding away somewhere. Ooh, yeah, that's cool. Big, juicy, yummy color. Gotta fucking love it. So you can only have apparently 1,000 subs on YouTube, as I said, and I've had mine maxed out for years. I mean, geez, I've been, at least, I think as most of us probably have, if you're old enough, been on YouTube, at least watching videos on YouTube since the early days of YouTube's incarnation. But one thing I find with a lot of artist videos, just as an observation as an artist, is that there's a couple exceptions, but there aren't that many, is that artists are generally really nice people. They're generally afraid of people. They're generally very nice, presentable, and they try and be professional. And yeah, we're all weirdos. Everybody's weird. I don't care if you're an artist or not, but artists in particular are pretty fucking weird. And but I find that a lot of artists on YouTube, they're on this platform, they're trying to be accepted, they're trying to get their work accepted. I'm only on my 4th video that I'm posting. I've made probably 50 of them. And that's what we all want. But it feels so antiseptic. Me, like a lot of artists on YouTube, they're just too nice, too polite, too proper, too and I love them all. And I'm not name names or anything pointless. I'm not here to call anybody out or talk about anybody else or what they did. I'm happy to bring positive, and I'm just making a general observation. I find a lot of artists on YouTube are very polite. And I'm not saying I'm not. I'm very polite, but I'm not gonna wear a different set of pants every time I come on here in front of the camera. I'm gonna be myself. That means every once in a while you might hear a curse word or something really fucked up come out of my mouth. Hopefully that won't offend a huge amount of people, but hey, whatever, it happens. If you're afraid of offending people, you're probably not going to get very far in life. At least not in America. But I just mean, and it's not a criticism. It's not a criticism. I just think it's a little antiseptic. It's a little too pure. That you get out of bed, you come out, you put on this happy face, and then you stand in front of a bunch of people, and essentially you're just the better version of yourself. Well, this is where I am all the time. I mean, it's where I live. I live in my studio, and I'm not going to be a stranger in my own home I guess that's my bigger point. And that's all I mean. There was nothing negative implied, and that's what I mean by antiseptic. I'm not going to be that. I'm definitely just going to say what's on my mind at the time and do what I feel and paint what I want to paint. And I know that we're all trying to build views and build a channel and get noticed here, but I am not going to start that journey by doing the same thing everybody else does. You know, I'm not going to go out and make that eye tutorial or you know, because that's an easy thing. It's kind of like the same. Well, it's funny. I see other artists do this too, but just in general in the business world, do you know how many people are out there who are rich trying to show other people how to get rich, and that's how they got rich? There you go. That's what I'm talking about. I just feel that way about a lot of artists in general. And yeah, I have no fucking problem showing somebody how to do something. That's not it at all. There are no trade secrets here. You want to know how I do something? I'll tell you. You want to know my formulation for a certain medium? I'll write it down for you. Have fun. Sell it. I don't care. It's not the point. Humans are very socially ingrained. We're all a part of a larger community, and even if you are a recluse and you know, a recluse from society and you like to hide, you're still a part of it. You still have to shop. You still have to pay your taxes, unless you live in a tree out in the woods, which there's nothing wrong with that. I spent a lot of time doing that. I'm telling you, I've got all kinds of fun stories. Stay tuned, stay tuned. They'll come out when we're painting and I run out of shit to talk about when we're talking about art. But I'm not trying to be the anti-Bob Ross, or I'll bring up Bob Ross a lot. Who doesn't as an artist? I mean, we all grew up, or I did at least. I grew up painting to Bob Ross when I was like 12, 13 years old. I was sitting there with my at that time, Bob Ross brand oil paints, was stunk, by the way. Horrible, horrible smelling shit. In fact, I still have a tub of his liquid white around here, which is what he would generally throw down as his base coat on a canvas. He would paint his acrylic prime canvases. I assume they were acrylically primed. That's generally the way most of them are. And then he would reprime them with his liquid white oil paint and leave it wet to paint into. That was his technique, painting wet and wet, which actually wasn't his technique. He got that from William Alexander, which he's all over YouTube. He's dead. He's a long time dead. He died, I believe, long before Bob Ross did, but that was Bob Ross's teacher was Alexander, and he was every bit as much of a character as Bob was. Alexander was, I believe, a German guy. I think he was German or Austrian, I don't remember. But I've watched a lot of Alexander myself. He's a wonderful, wonderful guy. And didn't like Bob too much, funny enough. So, Bob was one of his students, and Alexander felt that Bob ripped him off. Because Alexander was doing the same shit. He was doing videos. He was doing this professionally. He was doing exactly everything Bob Ross wanted to do. That's why Bob Ross studied under him in the first place, was because Bob's whole mission in life was to become a famous art instructor. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to be a famous, recognized art instructor. So he went to the most famous, recognized art instructor that he could find at the time, whose painting style he liked. And Bob had studied with other artists before. He would switch, take everything he could find from one artist and then go on and learn from another. That's what we all do, right? Take what you can from a book and then go pick up another book. There's nothing wrong in any of it, but Alexander didn't take it well. Because Bob became more recognized than he did, and there was a lot of jealousy there, and Alexander just felt that Bob Ross took all of his techniques, basically, which he did, by the way, because Alexander claims to have pioneered them, which he didn't. He may have come up with the paint into wet white paint. I don't know. I'm not really sure. I'm not positive on that. But I'm just me. And we're all just you. You're all just you. We're all just who we are. I'm only talking about this because I'm just starting out, just doing this. And a lot of my trepidation over doing this is like, well, how do I attack this? How do I approach it? How do I be different? How do I not do the exact same thing everybody else is doing? And the answer to that was real easy. Be yourself. I'm not going to come on here and act and try and be I'll be a softened version of myself. Yeah, sure. There's something called tact. Having tact is just smart. You don't walk into the front door of a church and then rip a huge fart in front of the procession. You know, it's just, it's called having tact. You know, so, and I have been known to throw bombs, you know, like, you know, in situations. That was me, especially in my youth. I was a huge instigating things. I always was. I always had a very strong opinion. I think most young people do. And then you get to a certain point in your life when you realize most of those things that I was arguing really hard for were wrong. I'm not even that person anymore. I've changed and I don't even believe that anymore. Maybe I know more. Or I've discovered more. I read a lot on psychology. It's actually always been a real fascination for me. I've always been obsessed with reading it. Papers on psychology, you know, just how people think. Philosophers have read a lot of philosophy, whatever, big deal. Like we all read, right? Or some of us read, I suppose. I was always a heavy reader, like probably from my sophomore year in high school on. I became a voracious reader of history, world history, American history, art. And my point is in that is just constant willingness and want to learn, you know, to push yourself to understand more and to put your bias aside. Because when you're young, you're very biased. You're always convinced that you have all the answers when you really don't have any answers, because you don't have the experience to base those answers on, you know. And that's painting, that's everything, that's being a doctor, that's you have to wisdom partially, a partial definition I would say for what I consider wisdom is, or what is considered wisdom, is knowing when to let's say, for example, in an argument, somebody starts a political argument. There's 3 people in a room. I call that a debate. If you have 2 people, it's a conversation. You have 3 people, it's a fucking debate, because you always have a person as an observer, you know. But I always find that the best tactic for me anymore is to just keep my mouth shut and watch the fireworks. I feel no need to venture into or affect other people's deeply held belief systems, politically, philosophically. I just do this, and if people choose to want to try and understand, then that's up to you. It's like going into a library. I chose to walk into that. I don't volunteer anymore. I have to add, like, you know, I get pretty babbly. I lose my points all the time. I do that in a regular conversation, much less the fact that I'm trained to concentrate on doing this and talk at the same time. Because I'm thinking about every single thing I'm doing. I'm mixing colors for everything I'm doing, and I'm talking philosophy and bullshitting to a camera, really to myself, having a conversation with myself, which is fun and a challenge. And when I can get set up to the point where I can actually see commentary while I'm streaming, that'll really change the game. Hopefully that'll be soon, because that's what I want. I want to hear all you guys throw your monkey poo at the screen. Mad at me. Tell me how bad I suck. It's fine. It doesn't bother me. I don't care anymore. If I like what I do,
I'm pretty happy. And if you can walk into a gallery with your portfolio, usually your cell phone, or restaurant, strike up a conversation with the owner and just be like, hey, how you doing? Like what you got going on here? It's a beautiful place. You know, would you like to, you know, venture into showing them your work somehow, cleverly, without being an annoying artist? Then you never know. You might open some doors. You might get yourself a show. Never be afraid to. First time I went for a show, I really wanted to do shows. You know, I was in my early 20s when I first started doing actual art shows, like going to restaurants in my local town, Reno, Nevada, at that time and now. But I was, you know, I really wanted to get out there. I mean, I think we all want to be appreciated. What's the point, as I said, of this hiding somewhere? You want people to see it, and you probably want to do this for a living. So you probably want people to see it. But if you want that to happen, you have to be brave enough to put it out there. And fear is quite the paralyzing thing. You can ruin your entire life over being too afraid to experience it. I'm really working instinctively. I'm not even really thinking about what I'm doing. I'm done this before. And there's certain things I really don't like that are going on, but that's okay. They'll get fixed. It's a building block, you know. I know from experience that even when I do something that I don't like, sometimes I'm doing it as a calculation to set myself up for the next step, which is going to make it something I will like. It's called patience, having patience, and again, experience. And patience is a muscle. I was not the most patient person in my youth, trust me. But a lot of my works will be, tend to be kind of crazy detailed. Not even this one. This one's kind of like in the middle. But yeah, now I am going back into these shadows and popping in some more saturated color. Man, I lost my train of thought. I forgot what I was talking about. It's okay. Just talking. Just keeping it flowing. So since I am working into a shadow, I'm trying to make this all shadowed. The reason I'm doing that is so I don't have to think about it too much. For the next stage, which is going to be, and I love this in here, this little bit of light, this little bit of light, this little bit of light, because I'm going to pop in more light into this shadowed area. It'll create a lot more drama that way. I didn't have my darks well enough established in the first place. It's part of the reason it was looking so busy, so messy. Probably not so much on camera, but to the naked eye, if you were here, you'd probably agree. It was a little, it still is in some areas. I'm not totally done filling this in. Just kind of working back and forth as I always do. Little this, little that, little salt, little pepper. Excuse me, so sorry for that. Burps happen. But you know, it's funny. I mean, it's weird. It wasn't a huge leap for me. I mean, it didn't really bother me too much, but I don't think anybody, like, at the beginning, I think it's a little weird seeing yourself on camera and hearing your own voice outside your own head, because your voice in a recording, as most of us would probably agree, is not exactly how we want to be perceived. Like, most people don't like the sound of their own voice. In fact, there was a recent study, an article on that, about how your own voice sounds deeper to you because your voice is resonating through your own body. You're feeling it resonate through your bones. You're feeling it resonate around in your head. So your voice is, in your own mind, is actually a couple degrees, octaves deeper than you perceive it externally. So when you hear your voice externally, you're hearing a much higher pitched version of what your voice actually, or you're actually hearing what your actual voice sounds like to other people, which I think throws a lot of people off, and there is that hurdle. But yeah, I think I'm past that. I actually quite enjoy like reviewing my work and these videos. It doesn't bother me at all. In fact, I thought it would, but it doesn't. I actually am enjoying it. That's why I did about 50 videos before you guys saw this one. You know, actually 3 months ago, I just got brave and I didn't practice. I just threw one out there and it wasn't too bad. I actually wasn't too displeased. And then I did about 50 videos in between that are in my private folder on my YouTube channel, which will never be seen by anybody because that's where I was shadowboxing how I was going to do this. And in the last couple months also, I've been kind of refining my studio setup so it was more photogenic. Adjusting my lighting, getting new equipment. I hung these curtains as a backdrop so the camera could focus and not be... not have any distractions in the background, because I have a lot going on behind here. I have a lot of paintings behind here. This is about 5 feet between here and the, well, about 4 feet between here and the wall. And yeah, it's just too much to look at. I want you to be able to focus, and I am so happy I did it. It actually really helped me. I love it. As soon as I did it, I was just ecstatic. It was like it took so much distraction away from the painting process by just having this black backdrop. But you pull it back, and here, fun, you know, I've got cabinets. I don't know if you can even see this where I have the camera, but these are all my brushes. Top 3, 4 drawers, all solid brushes. Those are really deep drawers, all art crap. And then, yeah, paintings. I've got all kinds of paintings down here. Gotta keep them somewhere. And then I've got a bunch of paintings out in the garage. And probably like 150 paintings in people's homes. So, and they're all this, all, you know, it's a lot of work. Not all as detailed as this, and a lot of them are smaller. It's actually part of my strategy behind doing live shows is I have a really good variety of work. You know, you have your, I try and do 3 to several, depends, real key pieces. Depends on the venue, depends on what I have in my inventory and what I can get done. If I'm doing a coffee shop show and I am 2 months out, I'll probably start 2 or 3, 4 paintings that are appropriate to the venue, you know, like doing a coffee shop. Yeah, you might as well do some coffee art. Kitsch, yes. Smart, yes. I mean, come on. You know, you're in a coffee shop. Another fun thing about doing public shows, especially shows where you have a lot of people, I think everybody should do them. If you're an artist, you should do them. And there's a huge advantage. There's dozens of reasons why I could find to do it, but one of the funnier ones, not even funnier, but it's actually investigative, is let's say you're doing a coffee shop show. I would I would do these shows for like a month, 2, 3 months at a time, and a real fun thing to do is to find a back corner in the coffee shop, especially if it's a busy one. That makes it more fun. And order a cup of chai, coffee, whatever the heck you want, and kick back and listen to people. See if they react to your work. And I really mean it. And I'm a person who really tries to get noticed with my work in terms of like, it's loud, you know? I hate, this is an inappropriate saying, but I always say I'm trying to stage an accident. You know, I'm trying to get people to rubberneck, to slow down anytime they walk by anything I do. Either if that's with color or subject matter or whatever, I'm always trying to get to, you know, I want people to notice. And when I'm in coffee shops, it's fun because you can sit there and listen to all the shit talk that people make against you, or all the compliments. And it's usually, you know, you'd be surprised. Most of the time, you're probably going to be encouraged. It's going to be empowering and enriching experience. But I find it just as entertaining when people hate your work. And it's happened. I had a couple socialite young ladies one time. They were just tearing me to shreds, and I'm sitting at the table next to them, giggling. No fucking shit. I'm sitting there. I'm like laughing and trying not to, you know, I'm like within a foot of them, literally. And sitting, you know, it's a very small coffee shop. We're all packed in there. I'm sitting there just kind of giggling. And I sat there for like an hour and a half, and you know, just listen to them talk shit. And they weren't talking about my work the whole time, of course. Just, but there's my point. You know, you're getting feedback, and you know, they're like, it's too Delinian, it's too Dr. Seuss, it's too, well, fuck. You know, it's, we're all inspired by something. And while I definitely agree with the influences, because they are my influences, there's a lot in this, you know. It doesn't bother me. Don't let, you know, it's always something, and it can bother me, but being compared to other great artists, not to say that I am great, that's not my point. My point is to be compared to great artists in history is no bad thing. You should never think you're great. You should always try to work to be great. There's big difference. Never buy your own bullshit. Stay hungry. Stay a starving artist in your own mind. Even if you find some success. And I'm going to come back and probably throw some really wacky highlights into some of this grass. I mean, straight up, I'm going to throw some hot pinks. You know, it has highlights on green grass. Why would I want to do that? Separation. And before you think I'm a complete nutbag, which you probably already do anyway, because I think I am. Wait and see. We'll see if it works or not together. And I know it'll work because I do it all the time. Meaning throwing what seems like inappropriate color into a certain area. Ooh, that's pretty thick. Now, that's a very impasto. It's okay, it's smooth right out. Just trying to catch the edges of these a little bit. There we go. It's not too bad. So, I'm working on the turn. The turn is actually one of the more frustrating and fun parts of any painting to me. And the turn is in everything that's three-dimensional, meaning the edge, the apex away from light. So if my knuckle was a mountain and the sun was over here and it's hitting this side of the mountain and this is the shadow side of your mountain, well, the turn would be the area in between. And that's usually where you're going to find your strongest color, is in the turn between the light and the shade. That was way too saturated for this background. So I'll use my thumb to smush and dull it up. That worked okay. I'm definitely going to come back into these mountains and do a few more layers over them, but I'm really happy with how I established them so far. They're actually fine. I don't want to overwork them. I tend to overwork stuff, but I can rescue it. I'm really good at rescuing things that have been overworked. I just come back in and start getting it loose again. That's my solution. If you gotten too tight and things are starting to feel stuffy, well then get brave and start throwing some more pure saturated color into it here and there, and try and pull the dinge out.
So, all the bullshitting aside, I'm about almost 3 hours in. Well, actually, I'm about 4 or 5 hours into this today, honestly, because I've been working on this thing outside of the camera. Like, after I had my dinner break, I actually came in here and worked on this for a bit, and then took another break, and then, yeah, worked on it some more. My general pattern of working when I paint is to start whenever I feel comfortable to start that day, usually pretty early. I usually like rub the sand out of my eyes, whenever that is, and jump right up and start messing around, fixing things that I see immediately. You know, seeing it with fresh eyes in the morning is a huge help. And, you know, it's like taking that step away, and you'll see me disappear away from this canvas constantly because I'm actually doing it less than I normally do because I'm just being pretty focused on just trying to darken this up. And I think I succeeded because it's really oppressive looking now. But that's okay. I'm not worried about it. It's not really oppressive. It's there's plenty of detail in it and plenty of color saturation. It's just really, really dark. But it won't be for long. And again, I'm probably not going to, in this session, come in and try and brighten this up too much. I want to think about it. In fact, I'm probably going to come back in and do even more dark, because it's a little too samey even now that I did that one glaze. I'm going to come in here with another glaze and try and create more separation where I want clumps of grass. So like right here, I can see I have a clump of grass here going into another clump of grass, going into another clump of grass, but there's very little contrast variation between the two. I can see where they start and stop. I do have it darker here. I have it darker here, but I'm going to intensify that effect before I come back in here and then start doing, here, I'll just show you, before I start doing crazy shit like this. Like, before I start throwing, well, this is a really bad area. Well, this is a lemon yellow. Yeah. So in contrast, this is, well, it's a little bit almost orangey, but this green is very warm, whereas this green, even though it's just as bright, if not brighter, is very cool. So this color will recede, although because it is so bright, it is kind of jumping out in front of this. That's okay, I'll fix that. And I'm getting way, I just wanted to show that for effect. That was actually the wrong color to even throw in there in the first place. But I'll leave it, who cares? It's fun. It's a little fun thing for now, and I'll come back and probably mess with it later. Throw some green in this purple. I love purple and green contrasted next to each other. It's just one of my favorite combinations. It would look terrible in a car. That's why color is a matter of context. But in a landscape, I think purple and greens are like bros. Yeah, they get along real well. Kind of cross complementary to each other. All right, so because red and green are complementary to each other, and you know. All right, I'm gonna take a gander for a second. I'm gonna step back and probably blow some poison in front. I'm just vaping, which is a horrible thing to do to yourself. I rolled cigarettes for nigh on 30 years. Hand-rolled cigarettes, filterless, of course, obviously rolled. Now I smoke this thing, and I swear this thing makes my lungs feel worse. Although I am glad I gave up the cigarettes, don't get me wrong. This is next. I've been on this thing for like 5 years. And for reference, I'm 44 and I've been smoking. Well, I had my first cigarette when I was 7, so. But I didn't consistently smoke until I was about 13. But yeah, I've been smoking since I was 13. With breaks, you know, I took years off here and there. Took like a 4.5-year break from smoking. Was fine until I got drunk. Rather, went out with a bunch of buddies. And they're not to blame, it's totally me. I'm not trying to put this out on somebody. Anything you do to yourself is your own fucking fault. But, you know, you're at a bar, you have a couple drinks, and you want a cigarette. Next thing I knew, I was buying a pack. And it was much harder to quit. Again, after that, it took me about 20 tries. I even lasted a year one time after that, and then started smoking again. I don't know, it's just, fuck. It's brutal, man. The shit we do to ourselves, especially in our youth. The things that you wish you could take back.
Such a horrible habit. But hey, I'm a nervous Nelly sometimes. Anxiety is terrible. Anxiety is a soul-crushing thing, and I think most of us have a lot of anxiety. But when you're, I don't know, I'm extra anxious. I always have been. I'm as anxious what I paint is, I'm almost more anxious what I paint than when I'm not painting. And when I'm not painting, I'm always anxious. So do the arithmetic, I'm pretty much always anxious. It's good and bad. I'm just taking a look to see where I want to go next. If I can't think of anything right off the bat immediately, I'm not going to bore you guys. I'm going to end this. And continue it again tomorrow, which I will definitely, almost certainly anyway, be on again tomorrow. I've got a lot of other projects going on besides what I show you guys, so, you know, if I'm not here, it's because I'm working on something completely different. Sorry if that was loud. I just should have lid to my thinner container up on the counter here. Yeah, my mostly bald noggin is always blocking the camera whenever I'm fetching new paint here, because I have my palette down here, and then I've got this other shelf that I have my tripod on. I think I'll just try and create some interest in some of these darks a little bit, and then I'll call it quits for the day. On camera, I'll almost certainly pick at this off and on all the rest of the night for the next several hours. That's typically how I work. I work in very short little bursts and take breaks and then go right back to doing it again. And I'll do that from the time I wake up until the time I go to sleep, which I don't sleep much, but I only sleep like anywhere from 4 to 5 hours a day on average, usually, probably. I've always been an insomniac. Busy mind, think too much. So this is the art of ideas. That's why I named this channel this, and you'll find out why. This channel's, so every painting is an idea. You either philosophically, compositionally. There's a lot of ideas in art. We're here to talk about all the ideas that make art art. What is art? And art is an idea. Yeah, an idea for a painting, idea for a philosophy of sculpture, whatever you're trying to communicate. Art is a lot about how you think about life, not necessarily what you do about it. Because art is it's a synonym for art. I don't know. Art is about expression, if nothing else. It's a form of communication. Being a good artist is all about learning how to be a good communicator. I'm a really good chameleon. I think part of it is just because of the job choices I've had in my life, and I would consider myself reasonably intelligent. I still think I'm a fucking moron, but I'd say I'm a reasonably intelligent human being, enough to be able to work in many different career types, many different genres of craft. I have worked upholstery, construction, cooking, been a chef, whatever, you know. That's a short list, but those are most of my big professions that I've had in my life, and I've done all of those for years. Like, so my point is that when you do a job that forces you to communicate with people constantly, and especially in some of the fields I've worked in and in construction, I've done a lot of like kind of high-end construction work, I guess you could say, in the sense that it's stuff for like rich people. I'm in the Reno Tahoe area, and I mean, yeah. So like last summer, this time I was working for a billionaire. Just case in point, airline industry guy. So yeah, multi-billionaire. I talked to him like anybody else. And you could tell you found it really refreshing. We hung out a lot. He's a really nice guy. Older gentleman. He was pushing his 80s, but people are just people. It doesn't matter how much money they are. They're just people with more money. And some people are just bigger assholes. But he was reasonably cool for the most part. I have a lot to say about that guy, actually. A lot of stories to tell. Not about him. I wouldn't get nothing personal, just a situation. I would never violate anybody's privacy by talking about anything personally about him or who he was. I won't even give his name. It's not my place. But just the situation, you know, from artistic, kind of reflective, because his wife was an artist. I found that really interesting. We ended up hanging out a lot, talking about art. So, but yeah, on these many hundreds of painting sessions together, I'll find all kinds of bullshit from my past and future to talk about. So this transition, I have this light. This is very thick right here. This is as thick as any Van Gogh I've seen in person. I've only seen a few actual Van Goghs in person, but I'm fortunate to have seen a few in person. But yeah, this is as thick or thicker than he actually ever would have gotten. Believe it or not. It's hard to tell on this camera. And I have so much light that flattens everything out. I know. I've watched myself paint enough times on film to know that the colors get washed out from the extreme light, and so does all the texture. It looks pretty flat on camera, but when I bring the camera up, and let's do that right now, actually, we can do that. Let's move this sucker around. Maybe you can see a little bit of it, some of the texture that I have in some areas. But again, I only put this texture in certain areas because I knew it was going to be there. I was fully 100% confident. Like, I'm not going to mess with that. I'm just going to build around it. It's hard to see the texture because I have my light set up from every angle, so it's canceling out all the shadows by intent. See, I barely touched that head, and I like him. He's looking a little bit like a pig, though. I think I'll work on that. He's cute, though. And I don't want too much detail in the face. I'm not even going to add a mouth. I want to... Yeah. I want him just to kind of coalesce with the scene. I'm not even quite straight here, am I? But then maybe you can see some of that striation I had going on in these darks, because you can still see it. See, I got a lot darker, but you can still see those colors under it through that glaze I put on. And you see a lot of light reflecting off of this one. Yeah, and you would anyway if the whole painting was wet, obviously, but but a lot of the reason you're seeing that sheen is because most of the sessions on this painting up until now have been wet on wet. But since I haven't worked on this thing in probably 2 years, I've radically changed how I paint. I tend to stick more to dry brush now. It's just easier to control the paint most of the time. But everything has its advantages and disadvantages. When you work dry brush, one of the disadvantages is that you're gonna get more sink in. That means that those dark areas, those dark colors are going to get flat, and it washes your color out because you don't have as much contrast. And how you solve that is by doing pre-varnishes. So we'll get into that some other time, and I'm sure a lot of you real artists out there already, real artists, I just mean working artists who have some experience with oil paint, know all about it. And this tree, this upper part of the tree, that needs extensive amounts of work. I still have no idea exactly what I'm going to do to it, but because I was actually thinking about alternating the leaf direction, which, yeah, we'll get to that another time. I don't want to overcomplicate this. But, yeah. And in the last 2 days, I darkened all this area of her body because it's really facing away from the light. And I had it almost as bright as this area. It just didn't make any sense. And that always bugged me. But it wasn't a bad way to start because it allowed me to establish all this three-dimensional form, make it look good. And then I just actually have been coming in with glazes. And in cool colors, purples and blues primarily. It's pretty much all you see there is purple and blue. And then and I'm just starting to build up where the highlight's gonna come through just a touch here and there. And then I'll throw some yellows into it. Just in a few spots. Think, no, geez, how am I blanking this? Geez, Renoir. I'm thinking French Impressionism here, and I was blanking the name. Monet, Renoir. You know, I mean, there's just whatever. Anyway, but Renoir, he in particular was really good about that. Doing flesh tones on ladies. I really admire him in his flesh tones. Again, I've seen several of his paintings in person, and in fact, I at least for the paintings I've seen of his in person, and they may have been more minor works, because I know he did do a lot of technical work. In fact, later towards the end of his life, he felt like he had basically wasted his entire life with Impressionism. He felt like he had made a huge mistake by doing Impressionism because he was always wanting to be respected by the old guard of the art community. He wanted to be a respected realist painter. But he didn't go that direction. He did with some of his work, and towards the end of his life, he got back into doing more technical work. But ironically, it was his, it was the work that he did in his life that wasn't overly appreciated as much as he would have liked, that actually bought him fame after he died. It's funny. It's funny and sad and tragic. But yeah, and yeah, there's just way too sheen. See, if I block the light, you can actually see a little bit of the true color. Now the camera's focusing, you can see a little bit of the variation. I like her face. I think it's okay. I'll work on that a little bit more, but her face isn't going to change a huge amount. It's going to have more highlights and stuff on it when I'm done. Putting the camera back. And maybe I'll pick at it for another minute or two. But I think I'm going to take a break just because I need to have a think about what I'm going to do next. You can only go so far in certain areas, and since I just drew a huge amount of dark color over all of this, I can come back in and do some wet into wet. Since this area is wet, I can come in here, and it's a wonderful technique because it allows for really easy blending. But I don't think I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to let it finish, do its thing, dry, and then I'll work back into it, because then I don't have to worry about messing it up. If I do screw up, I can just wipe it off. It's not a big deal. And it just makes it easier when you're wiping out anyway. Like if I want to adjust my lighter tones, it's easier to wipe on them when I know I'm not going to be wiping dark color into my lighter tones. Because the older and more experienced I get, the more I take that shit real seriously, as far as like making my my contrast really pop. It's not so much about being realistic, it's about believability, which I will say constantly. It'll become an annoying broken record of me repeating a lot of the same things. But I repeat them to myself as much as anyone.
So, and I don't really consider this a learning or teaching channel. This is more of a having fun hanging out painting channel, where you might just accidentally learn something every once in a while. I'm actually kind of softening up some areas. I am actually blending a little bit, which I do pretty sparingly anymore. A lot of my older works were very blended, very soft, which has its place. And I still use that effect in all my paintings. Like, even if I'm doing thicker, more impasto strokes, I will still tend to blend out the hard, harsh edges as they transition into shadows. Otherwise, they don't look right. In fact, working impasto, at least the way I've been doing it lately, is more measured, and not so much sporadic and spontaneous. I like being sporadic and spontaneous, but that, if you're, you know, that can really screw you up. That's why if I tend to be spontaneous, I try to keep my paint thin now. That's why I like doing the first initial stages pretty thin and not in thick paint. It's because you can be spontaneous and sketch around and draw and do blends and just have fun and feel out the composition and allow for all the mistakes in the world you want. Because as the paint becomes more opaque and thicker as you progress through the rendering process or the painting process, then you can really make your decisions more carefully. Whereas if you jump the gun too soon and you start doing a lot of impasto or heavy paint and you decide to change something, then you are going to spend a lot of time trying to make it look like you didn't change it in the first place, because whatever you had done previously will show through. And it'll be really annoying. And I have all kinds of paintings around here. In fact, the one I'm finishing up here, not this one, but the one I alluded to earlier, which is one of the 3 videos on this page, or 4 videos now, I guess. It's Prance. It's a fun painting. I like that painting. I like the composition of it. That's why I chose to go back, and it was a finished painting years ago. And then I just decided to pull it out of the closet and rework the entire thing from scratch. Basically, I spend months repainting the entire thing, you know. So, which sounds like a crazy thing to do, but I'm crazy. I like, if I feel compelled to do something, I have to do it. So I'm actually just kind of blending out areas that I think are drawing the eye too much. Plus, you know, as you're getting into these shadows, you will not see a lot of detail or texture. In fact, I mean, it's not an absolute rule. There are no absolute rules in art, honestly. I consider them more guidance. Rules in art are more like guidance. They're warnings. They're like, if you do this, there's going to be a consequence, and this is what the consequence is going to be. Well, if you already know that, then you can plan around it and sometimes use that to your advantage. But the older and wiser I get and more experience I get with painting, and the more I realize what I want to do, I'm trying to work less hard and get more done. You know, it's all about, you know, I guess the mastering of your art kind of thing, or the feeling that you feel like you're mastering some aspects of your art is not just the ease of application, but also the ease of correction, and not fighting yourself and setting yourself up to fail. Never set yourself up to fail. Life already does that for us. There's already enough shit thrown in our fucking direction on a goddamn daily basis to worry about. Don't be your own enemy. And we all are. I mean, I think most artists range from states of
absolute megalomania to depression on a regular basis, sometimes within the same few minutes. Happens to me all the time. I'll look back and look at something I did and either be like, fuck yeah, or I hate myself and I want to jump off a cliff. I think we all feel that way. Sometimes when I feel that way about jumping off a cliff, it's because I see someone else's work that makes me jealous. You know, you see that other person's art and you're like, God, geez, I really wish I was as good as that person. What you really mean is you wish you had their style and that you painted the way they do. But, you know, I think everybody feels that way. There's no easy answers. I don't have an answer for that. Just find what you love to do. Everybody is basically an amalgamation of all their influences. Aren't we all? So, everything we do is, in a sense, as a creative force, is flattery to everything that came before us. I believe I already said that. Repeating myself. Man, the average person only really has a working vocabulary of shockingly around 700 words. So, whereas the average Oxford graduate, which you would expect, being it's like basically the college of English literature, graduate from that school usually has an average vocabulary in in excess of 2,000 words. I happen to know that just from reading about Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien, you know, which, yeah, it's a great gift to give yourself early in life, is to read that as a kid. I think everybody should. I read that. Funny enough, I never read The Hobbit until right before Peter Jackson's version of it came out. It's funny, I had always seen the old 80s cartoon, which I always liked. And I knew the story, but I had never read The Hobbit, but I had read the Lord of the Rings at least 10 times. And then, of course, after Lord of the Rings, I found a few years later something I liked even more than Lord of the Rings, which was Dune. And I love them both dearly. They're both a big influence on me, as they are on millions of other human beings all over the world, in every culture, and every color, and every sphere that has seen it, you know. We're all influenced. George Lucas was heavily influenced. He was heavily influenced by Dune to make Star Wars. That's one of his influences with Dune. So, there you go. That's where, thank Dune for Star Wars, by the way. As well as a French comic, which I can't remember the name of right now. But, yeah. We all have our influences. George had his. He basically took a huge amount of influences, which if you watch enough Star Wars documentaries, and I'm a Star Wars fan, sure, but I'm not like I'm not a crazy fan person. I am not, you know, except for maybe of other artists. That's where I'm a crazy fan. You know, like if I had the opportunity to meet H.R. Giger when he was alive, which I always wanted to, I should have had the bravery to say something to him, because he was actually very receptive of artists. He liked artists. Most artists like, or can at least relate to their own kind, because they know how they think, you know, to at least some degree, you know. As H.R. Giger once said, he said the greatest fans of art were other artists. And I believe that's very true, you know. And I also believe that art critics are huge fans of artists, and were people who wanted to be artists, you know, and just for whatever reason, you know, felt it was better for them to take on the historical aspect. You know, they're more analytical. And you'll find your very analytical artists. There's plenty of them out there. I am sometimes very, very analytical when it comes to composition and subject matter. It can be that way. All right. Well, this was a lot of fun, and I am going to continue working on this tonight. So
for my last stream about 4 or 5 hours ago that I was doing that I had to cut short, unfortunately. I would have loved to have read that one out until now. We would still have been doing that session. So that would have been a good 6-7 hour stream, 8 hour stream, whatever it would have been. It didn't happen. A guy interrupted, but I'm still happy that we came back and worked on this. And yeah, we're gonna work again tomorrow, hopefully. I will anyway, even if I don't get on camera. But I have a lot of other stuff going on too. A lot of things outside of just painting. So, don't we all? Alrighty. Well, it's been wonderful. Had a lot of fun. Anyway, until the next time I pointlessly ramble, see you then. Bye.